So, Secretary Noem, at any time during your tenure as Director of Department of Homeland Security, have you had sexual relations with Corey Lewandowski?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Secretary, for joining us. Finally, you are in charge of protecting the homeland, and so your judgment and the judgment of your senior staff can be the difference between life and death. So I think that judgment would need to be unassailable. Why then, is the question, have you made Corey Lewandowski your de facto chief of staff who possesses an unchecked level of power at DHS? Under your leadership, this person has done things like fire your FEMA administrator while sitting behind your desk, which is your job to do, lobby to build the controversial detention facility known as Alligator Alcatraz, which has turned into a legal boondoggle costing Florida millions, and have veto and reviewing and signing power over large DHS contracts and grants, which again is your job. DHS has critical agency components like the Secret Service, FEMA, Border Patrol, cybersecurity. So does Corey Lewandowski have national security experience, military experience, law enforcement experience? No. He is a lobbyist, a failed campaign manager, which is causing my constituents who are waiting for their FEMA dollars and me to wonder what are his qualifications for this job. So according to the Wall Street Journal, you and Mr. L have a close relationship that has made President Trump, quote, uncomfortable. The president reportedly denounced Corey Lewandowski as your chief of staff due to reports of a romantic relationship between the two of you. So instead, you designated him as a special government employee, a position he has had well beyond the allowed 130 days and requires him to disclose if he is making money off of his position. Trump knows that this guy is shady. Corey has a decades-long record of physical battery, sexual harassment, illegal lobbying for a Venezuelan oil company, and bringing a loaded gun into a federal building. Despite being fired or removed from virtually every position he has ever held due to misconduct, he now wields unchecked, unconfirmed, undisclosed power over your department. This person has no experience running anything close to Department of Homeland Security or even advising someone in your position. He is unqualified, which again has left my constituents and I wondering why he is your top official.
Sydney Kamlager-Dove did not start this exchange by chasing gossip. She started with something much more serious, judgment. And that is what made this opening so effective. She reminded everyone in the room that Kristi Noem is in charge of the Department of Homeland Security, a department where leadership decisions can literally mean the difference between life and death. That is not a minor setup, that is a deliberate frame, because once you start there, every question about staffing, influence, and internal power becomes a national security issue, not just a political one. Then she zeroed in on Corey Lewandowski. And this is where the tension really began. Kamlager-Dove's argument was that Lewandowski was not just some outside advisor floating around the edges. She was painting him as a de facto chief of staff with unchecked influence inside DHS. She accused him of sitting behind Noem's desk while major personnel decisions were made, lobbying for controversial projects, and exercising veto or review power over contracts and grants. Whether viewers agreed with every implication or not, the point was clear. Why does someone with no obvious national security, military, or law enforcement background appear to have so much influence inside one of the most powerful departments in the federal government? That is what gave the whole exchange its charge. Because Kamlager-Dove was not simply saying Lewandowski is controversial. She was saying he is unqualified and yet somehow deeply embedded in a department responsible for FEMA, the Secret Service, Border Patrol, and cybersecurity. That is a serious charge. And by the time she brought up reports that even Trump was allegedly uncomfortable with how close Lewandowski was to Noem, the argument had shifted from staffing concerns to questions of personal judgment and possible conflict of interest. That is what made the setup so sharp. Kamlager-Dove was building toward one central idea. If this man has this much power, then the public has every right to ask why. Watch this clip.
So Secretary Noem, at any time during your tenure as Director of Department of Homeland Security, have you had sexual relations with Corey Lewandowski?
Mr. Chairman, I am shocked that we're going down and peddling tabloid garbage in this committee today.
Reclaiming my
And ma'am,
time.
one thing that I would tell you is that he is a special government employee who works for the White House. There are thousands of them in the federal government.
So reclaiming
and
my
is
time,
an advisor
Secretary, it is
and has
okay for
no,
you to be
no
offended
authority
by
to
the
be
question.
making any
It is
decisions.
okay for you to
has
be
no
offended
authority
by the
to
question.
be making
But it is
decisions
also
and
a
putting
real
up your
question.
position. So what I would say
And
to
you
you
should be able to
is
answer
that
the
what we do
question
at the Department of Homeland Security
clearly
every single
and without
day,
any hesitation.
every single day is to protect
If
this
someone
country
is
and
asking
to make
if
decisions.
you or any federal official is sleeping with their subordinate, that should be the easiest. You should be wanting to answer that question.
Is garbage?
Because it is not about
It is
your sex
offensive
life.
that you have brought
It is
that up.
about your
So
judgment.
that kind of garbage
It is
has
about
been refuted
reclaiming
for
my
years,
time so
and
that
you
I
need
can
to
hear myself.
recognize-
Chair.
Time belongs to the gentlelady from California, but it'd be nice if you would let her respond.
I will. I want to let you know it is about your judgment and decision-making. It is about the 260,000 employees that work under you that want to make sure that you are giving information and making decisions clearly. It is about conflict of interest. It is about a national security risk. Department of Homeland Security was created right after 9/11 to protect the homeland. And DHS has circulated an internal bulletin to law enforcement partners warning that the conflict of the war we're in could inspire lone actors or small-scale cyber activity inside the United States, according to a memo obtained by ABC News. So American lives are at risk. The people who work for you are at risk. And they want to know that the person at the top, you, are making decisions clearly, without any sort of cloudiness, and that they're your decisions because you're the secretary who was confirmed. That's what this is about. Saving the lives of Americans and not costing them millions of dollars, and not having a secretary who's compromised in her decision-making.
Then came the question that instantly turned the hearing into a viral moment. Kamlager-Dove asked Kristi Noem directly whether she had sexual relations with Corey Lewandowski during her time leading DHS. On the surface, that sounds like the kind of question people immediately label as tabloid politics. And Noem clearly tried to frame it that way, saying she was shocked that the committee was peddling garbage. But Kamlager-Dove did not back down, and that is what made this moment matter. Because she immediately explained that this was not about sex for the sake of scandal, it was about judgment. That was the heart of her argument. If someone is serving in a powerful department, and if there are questions about whether that person has a romantic or sexual relationship with someone exercising unofficial influence inside the agency, then that becomes a matter of decision-making, conflict of interest, and chain of command. Kamlager-Dove made that point very directly. She said this was about whether the decisions being made at the top of DHS were clear, uncompromised, and actually coming from the confirmed secretary. That is a much more serious argument than the headline alone suggests. She also tied it directly to the mission of DHS. This is not some symbolic agency. This is the department created after 9/11 to protect the homeland. And she drove that point home by bringing up warnings of heightened domestic risks, cyber threats, and the broader pressure of a dangerous national environment. In other words, Kamlager-Dove was telling the room, if American lives may be affected by the judgment of the secretary, then the public does not just deserve clarity, it requires clarity. That is why Noem's outrage did not completely shut the issue down, because Kamlager-Dove had already shifted the frame. She made it about compromised leadership, not personal morality. She made it about national security, not gossip. And whether people agreed with her tactic or not, she succeeded in making one thing impossible to ignore. If Lewandowski has real influence over DHS, then his relationship to Noem is not a private side issue. It becomes part of the public accountability story. Watch this clip.
Before I yield my time, I would like to enter into the record some articles, and I'm asking for unanimous consent. Noem tightens her grip on DHS. Lewandowski fired FEMA admin.
Without objection.
Okay. The next one is Kristi Noem secretly took a cut of political donations from ProPublica.
Without objection.
Kristi Noem fires pilot over a blanket, but is forced to reinstate him to fly home. Wall Street Journal.
Without objection.
Lewandowski taking out trash at Noem's D.C. home, Daily Beast.
Without objection.
Barbie's Mile High privacy chamber with alleged lover exposed. Wall Street Journal, how Corey Lewandowski became Kristi Noem's gatekeeper at DHS.
Without objection.
A pilot fired over Kristi Noem's missing blanket and the constant chaos inside DHS,
Without
Wall
objection.
Street Journal. Police charged Trump campaign manager with assault, PBS News.
Without objection.
Woman who accused Corey Lewandowski of assault speaks out. I don't want this to happen to anyone else, CBS
Objection.
News. Lewandowski's firm quietly inked deal with Venezuela-owned company, Politico.
Without objection.
List of U.S. cities raising security amid Iran conflict, Newsweek.
Without objection.
Kristi Noem, I have a few more, I'm sorry. Kristi Noem misled Congress yesterday about top aides' role in DHS contracts.
Without objection.
Policy number 10271 from ICE, it is an anti-fraternization policy prohibiting romantic or sexual relationships between supervisors and their subordinates. And with that, I yield.
Without objection. Gentleman from Texas, recognized 5 minutes.
By the final part of her time, Kamlager-Dove stopped arguing in broad terms and started trying to build a paper trail. This is where the hearing shifted from confrontation to documentation. She began entering articles and documents into the record, and that move mattered because it showed she was not trying to leave this as one dramatic exchange that would disappear into a news cycle. She wanted the controversy attached to reporting, headlines, and official policy references. That is how lawmakers try to turn a viral moment into something more durable. Look at the pattern she was trying to establish. She referenced reporting about Lewandowski's growing grip on DHS. She referenced stories about Kristi Noem's political and administrative controversies. She referenced a pilot being fired and then reinstated. She referenced Wall Street Journal reporting about internal chaos and Lewandowski's gatekeeper role. She even brought up past assault allegations and lobbying controversies tied to him. None of those items alone settles the entire argument. But together, Kamlager-Dove was clearly trying to build a cumulative case that this was not a random rumor. In her telling, it was a larger pattern of questionable conduct, blurred lines, and bad judgment. Then she went one step further. She introduced an anti-fraternization policy, specifically one that prohibits romantic or sexual relationships between supervisors and subordinates. That was not accidental. It was meant to bring the whole exchange back to policy and standards. Because once a hearing moves from "did this happen" to "would this violate the rules if it did," the conversation becomes harder to dismiss as pure politics. That was the real strategy here. Kamlager-Dove was trying to move the story from shock to accountability, from one explosive question to a broader claim that there may be a culture problem, a judgment problem, and a leadership problem inside DHS. Whether or not Noem answered the central question the way Kamlager-Dove wanted, the Congresswoman succeeded in forcing the issue into the record. And that is often where the real political damage begins.